Hello, and welcome to my Dream of the Rood presentation. This is a Christian dream poem from ancient England, and disputed in 8th or 10th centuries. I'm Grace, and this is for World Civilization Ancient to 1600 with Joshua Britt. So, what is the Dream of the Rood? The Dream of the Rood is an Old English Christian dream poem. Rood is from the Old English word rod, pole, or more specifically crucifix. So when talking about the Dream of the Rood, we're more so talking about like the Dream of the Cross and the Dream of the Rood itself and the crucifixion of Christ. Who produced the source? It is widely disputed on whether or not it was authored by one person or a group of people or like a village setting. For quite a while, it was either attributed to Cadmean or Cynewulf. Cadmean was the first major English Christian poet. Historian George Stephens claims that there's runic inscription on the Ruthwell Cross that basically signs Cadmean made me. However, this is largely no longer in circulation in the historian community. And it's a similar situation with Cynewulf. The Dream of the Rood is found on both the Ruthwell Cross and the Vercelli book, and I know I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but Cynewulf has two other poems in the Vercelli book that share religious and symbolic similarities to the Dream of the Rood dream poem. The more common and now canonized acceptance of authorship is now considered to have been an oral tale that was inscribed in runic form on the Ruthwell Cross, and then eventually translated into Latin for the Vercelli book. When and where was the source produced? You can see that little pointer where it says England is where specifically it was first found in its 8th century in the town of Ruthwell on the Ruthwell Cross. The Ruthwell Cross was an Anglo-Saxon runic cross from the 8th century Northumbria, which is now Scotland. And then in the Vercelli book was found in the library of Friedrich Bloom in 1822. It is now stored in Italy. Why was the Dream of the Rood created? The symbolism of the tree is one of the more significant incorporations between the two religions of Anglo-Saxon paganism and New Christianity. The Christmas tree is a really interesting application of this, in which it's a fusion of the two cultures. Evergreen trees were used for winter solstice celebrations and for Celtic Druids. They had also used evergreen wreaths during that time of the year. The Christmas tree is often considered to be a Christian symbol of the holiday, but that's because of its pagan conversion roots. The Christians adopted this tradition as their own and turned the original meaning into one incorporated tradition from the pagans and meaning into the Christian religion, so that they could find common ground in tradition, because these peoples were living in the same areas and interacting with one another. Professor Baker wrote, while the poem is clearly a religious text, a closer examination actually reveals some elements of German heroism. Creating the illusion that the Rood is that it, as an overtly pagan symbol due to its nature and personified glory as the central figure, or even the hero, was a tool in order to make Christ more the primary figure, or the figure we may remember the most. In the poem, it is the tree that is resurrected and becomes a symbol of Christianity when the human Jesus, just as the Germanic warrior, had fought out his battle and suffered death on the cross. That's a quote from one of my sources. And we'll talk about Beowulf and Christ as Germanic heroes later on. The Ruthwell Cross being the most striking example of a combination of Celtic artistic tradition known as interlaced interwoven with human and animal figures, biblical scenes, and Germanic ruins, and a warrior conception of Christ later developed into the poem of the Dream of the Rood, all bound together in an overtly Christian symbol. So this is again bringing that cultural appropriation and intermixing and conversion of Christianity, Germanic paganism, which would have been like Norse with like Thor and Odin and Yggdrasil, and Celtic Druids. What is the main idea? And with here I have the overall structure, and I'm going to be going into the different parts of the Dream of the Rood along with Christ as a Germanic hero. The short poem is split into 3 different parts: the dreamer's account of his vision, the Rood's monologue, and the crucifixion, and then the dreamer's resolution to seek salvation. Each part has its own undertone and message, and the Rood's monologue, the second part, is the longest part. Part 1 begins with the dreamer recounting that he had a dream about the tree that Christ was nailed upon. The tree is adorned with jewels and holy light. It seems to be a beacon of hope and purity. When Jesus was mounted on the cross, he took upon him the sin of the world. So one could say that since he was completely pure and the Prince of Peace, that a metaphorical view of him would in fact be jeweled and beautiful to look at, as represented in the text. And I kind of have a little picture of there showing on how art through the years had been bejeweled to reflect Christ's royal personage. In part 2, the Rood's monologue, and the largest portion of text, marks the beginning of part 2. Throughout the monologue, the Rood praises Christ for his strength and goodness, but there is also an undertone of item worship that was favored by the Anglo-Saxon pagans. In the cultural context for which this text was written, the Anglo-Saxons were invading Britain and their cultural norms were becoming normalized within the Celtic and Roman-influenced land. And the religion and culture, nature, and the world surrounding them were of great importance. As such, the author, trying to convert the pagans to Christianity, incorporated a personified tree that was honored, but only through the deeds of Christ. Now, in their religion, they had a huge component of their religion was Yggdrasil, in which Midgard and their version of heaven and their version of hell existed on a duality plane. So the authors took that representation and applied it, not exactly, but in a way, towards the Rood. And I kind of have, this is a dish from around that time that was, this is how Yggdrasil is typically pictured, but it is found in a Christian area in England, or Britannia. The Dream of the Rood ends with part 3, the dreamer's resolution to seek salvation. His attitude towards life has now been strengthened and uplifted by Christ and Rood's account for him. The Rood says, "May the Lord be my friend. He who here on earth has suffered from the hanging tree for human sin, he who ransomed us and gave us life, a heavenly home." The dreamer continuously praises Christ and announces that he is holiest and the most worthy of praise. And it is quite interesting to see this as well, because the dreamer is supposed to be an Anglo-Saxon person. So in this, they're showing on how he was strengthened in his Christian faith, that Christ is a hero in the same tradition of Anglo-Saxon heroes. Which brings us to Christ as an Anglo-Saxon hero. The Dream of the Rood is an amazing example of the merger between Christianity and the Odinism, paganism of the Germanic tribes. Specific cultural markers from Anglo-Saxons are found in the text, and I have mentioned these a few times in my voiceover, such as glorification of an inanimate object and the heroization of the Anglo-Saxon hero, traits that are applicable to Beowulf, but only because he is a surviving hero text. But there is the aspect of how the author, writing for a pagan audience, was incorporating traditional storytelling methods and culturally significant signs to heroize Christ, and therefore convert the audience. And with that as well, this was originally, at least from my interpretation of the text and how it had been found on the Rothwell Cross, I believe it to be originally an oral tale that had been passed down. And yet, beneath that gold, I begin to see an old, wretched struggle. When it first began to bleed on the right side, I was beset with sorrows, fearful for that fair vision. I saw that eager beacon, changed garments and colors, now is drenched, stained with blood, now bedecked with treasure. So that was talking about just how Christ went from this almost like a tragic stance, because, all the greatest heroes are brought down to their depths, so that when they rise back to the top, it's an even greater occurrence, and when they're bedecked with their riches, it is seen as more of a victory rather than just like surviving. What is the historical significance? This is the oldest English poem and is evidence of conversion literature as well as ancient art. And this photo I have back here is also where the Vercelli book is stored now. The Dream of the Rood is an extraordinarily written history of the cultural and historical events that happened in early Britain. We may not have many records from the time, but texts like this, along with Beowulf, provide an incredible amount of insight into the beliefs, the values, and the heroes that they really identified with in the people of the day. The religious heroic text was used as a conversion tool to bring together the warring factions of Britain. So it would have been the Picts, surviving Roman bands that had possibly integrated with the Celtics, the invading Germanic tribes, the monks and missionaries traveling from Europe, to bring together the warring factions of Britain and hopefully find some common ground in order to coexist. Combining elements of Christianity, Germanic religions, and the foundational culture of Britannia, the culture and language we know today would not have been the same without texts like these or without the bloodshed found on British soil thousands of years ago. Thanks, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me at gmbaldwin@scu.edu. Page 1 of my bibliography, page 2, and page 3. And thank you so much.